8:06 Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Thank you very much for joining us. And I want to say hello to legal fellow with the Heritage Foundation, old buddy Zac Smith. Zac, thank you very much for joining us here in Nashville, Tennessee. I thought this was interesting, and I'm glad that we were able to get you on today because I thought it was fascinating. The headline, of course, the Justice Department could delay Hunter Biden's plea deal. And part of this is that you folks at the Heritage Foundation, you've been asking for, demanding that they provide David Weiss, the guy out there in Delaware, provide some of his notes and the material involved in their investigation of Hunter Biden. So help me put all this together for me. How did the how did the Heritage Foundation get involved in all this?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on this morning, Dan. Look, there's a lot of information we still don't know about Hunter Biden and his plea deal. It certainly, from all appearances, looks like a sweetheart of a plea deal, something that seems unlikely that you or I would have gotten if we were accused or pled guilty to committing these same types of crimes. And so one of the things the Oversight Project at the Heritage Foundation did is they filed a Freedom of Information Act request, basically asking for information related to this plea agreement, any communications related to, how this plea agreement came about, who had final authority to sign off on this plea agreement, a lot of the issues that have been swirling around in the news and on Capitol Hill over the past several days and weeks. And so what came out of that is the Justice Department is basically saying they can't comply with the document request before the July 26th change of plea hearing that Hunter Biden is scheduled to have. And so because of that, there are a few options. They can essentially try to push through the documents request that doesn't look like it's going to happen, or as one of the DOJ lawyers suggested, they could potentially seek to delay Hunter Biden's change of plea hearing. And so there's a lot of moving parts to this right now. But at the end of the day, Dan, the important takeaway is essentially we need to find out who knew what, when, and who had final authority to sign off on this very generous plea agreement for Hunter Biden.
Well, it's crazy, but let me ask you, why can't they comply with the documents request? Is it because and I'm genuinely asking because I don't know these things, is it because there's just so many documents after 5 years? Is it because they don't want to give up the documents? Is it because they have something to hide? I mean, what's the problem here?
Well, I think a lot of it's going to depend on who you ask, of course. The Justice Department, I think, is going to primarily rely on the volume of documents, the number of individuals that they would have to ask for documents from or search their emails, that sort of thing, and the relatively short turnaround time in order to do that. One of the other issues, of course, is, I know you'll be shocked to hear this, government IT is not necessarily state-of-the-art all the time. And so there may be technical limitations, that sort of thing. But look, this is part of the ongoing conversation with the Justice Department. I think it's good, it's healthy, that they are being forced to kind of review what documents are out there, review what documents they may have to turn over. And at the end of the day, I think we all deserve an answer as to what exactly happened, who exactly had the authority to sign off on this plea agreement.
Let me ask, because, clearly, I believe this is clearly a sweetheart deal. You do as well, and most folks out there with half a brain understand what this is. Is it possible that the judge in this case, and this has been discussed, is it possible that the judge in this case may look at this and say, you know what, this clearly is a sweetheart deal, and perhaps not accept it?
It's a possibility. Now, I can tell you, in my experience as a former federal prosecutor, it's very rare for a judge to set aside a plea agreement. The judge certainly retains, sentencing discretion. And typically, in my experience, what happened if a judge was unhappy with the potential plea, the recommended sentence, he or she would simply tell the parties that and say, listen, if you accept this plea, I want you to be aware, I may not adhere to the sentencing recommendation that the government's made. Would you like to withdraw your plea? Now, different judges, different districts handle that sort of thing differently. But again, from all appearances, this appears to be a very lenient sentence, a very sweetheart plea deal that Hunter Biden has received. And we'll have to wait and see how the judge responds to that.
Well, 5 years. And it ultimately turns into what we saw, which is a plea deal, which incredibly lenient. But I just, off the top of my head, I jotted down some of the questions here. Did U.S. Attorney David Weiss, did he ask for special prosecutor status, and was that denied? Was Weiss blocked from pursuing more serious charges? Was Weiss blocked from pursuing charges in California and D.C.? What was the scope of the investigation? Was it just the non-payment of taxes? We throw in the gun charge, of course, as well. But with the taxes and the money, how did they get that money in the first place? That's what everybody wants to know. That's where James Comer, influence peddling and all that stuff comes in. Were these IRS whistleblowers, were they retaliated against? And so all of these things are questions that I have, and I probably missed a thing or two. Was there anything else that I'm missing in there? And in your opinion, as a guy who has been, involved in analyzing all of this for the Heritage Foundation, of all of those things, what do you think is the most damning? And it's okay to say all of the above.
Well, all of the above, right? But look, one of the reasons I think it's important that we not only are requesting these documents, but also the fact that James Comer and the House of Representatives are asking for documents, running their own parallel investigation to find out what happened, who knew what. All this is important because there are very contradictory stories, contradictory statements being made by Attorney General Merrick Garland and the whistleblowers who have come forward about the authority that David Weiss, the U.S. Attorney in Delaware, has. Now, David Weiss, he's been responding to requests from James Comer and the House Oversight Committee, basically trying to bring some level of clarity to those questions, although some of his answers seem like, exercises in studied ambiguity more than anything else. But I think it's important to run this to ground because at least what the whistleblowers have come forward and said, and what Attorney General Merrick Garland previously has told Congress, are mutually exclusive. They cannot both be true. So someone was giving, it appears to be a false statement, and it's important to run that to ground and see why these stories are inconsistent and to see whether, in fact, someone was being, to put it very mildly, less than truthful when they came forward and told their stories.
Let me ask you this, Zach, and appreciate you joining us here in Nashville, Tennessee. You look at David Weiss, and you look at the fact that his statements have been contradictory. And so it sounds to me like what happened is he gets in the room with all of these, what is it, 6, I think, right? 6 whistleblowers. And they all go and they take copious notes, including Shapley. And so they all take these notes. And so those notes all basically say the same thing, that Weiss comes into this meeting and it sounds almost like he's venting. He's blowing off steam. He's saying, they won't let me pursue charges in, D.C. or California. I've asked for special prosecutor status. I can't get it. And all of these, IRS whistleblowers, they take note. And then lo and behold, the story changes with David Weiss. And so I guess part of the question has to be asked, which David Weiss do you believe, and why would he just simply completely change his story once this whole thing came to light?
Well, David Weiss, he actually sent a letter yesterday to Lindsey Graham and some other members of Congress where he tried to bring a point of clarity. And his official story now, just to clarify, is he's saying that, he wants to avoid any misperceptions or any confusion. And he says he wrote the letter to make clear that he did not actually request special counsel status, but that he was engaging in preliminary discussions with DOJ officials to potentially be appointed as a special counsel, which would have allowed him to bring charges in any jurisdiction within the United States. Now, as he says in this letter, and he said in other letters, he hasn't been denied the authority to bring charges in any jurisdiction, But I think it's an important point to note that without this special counsel status, he would need sign-off either from someone at Maine Justice or someone in the U.S. Attorney's Office in one of these other jurisdictions in order to bring charges there. He wouldn't have national jurisdiction. He wouldn't have roving authority to bring charges anywhere within the United States. That's why we have 94 federal districts across the country with U.S. attorneys in each one of those districts. And so, it'll be very interesting to see kind of the follow-up questions to this latest letter, to see if Jim Jordan or Lindsey Graham or someone else kind of drills down and really gets to the bottom of this, because, again, there are so many stories floating around, so many statements, again, that are kind of statements in studied ambiguity floating around. I think it really is important to bring clarity to this entire situation.
So I'm not sure if I can ask this question, if I'm allowed to ask this question from the Heritage Foundation, but do you have a prediction as to how this ends? I mean, it sounds to me like, and I hate to say this, but my prediction is Hunter's going to enter into this plea deal and off he goes. And this is going to be just another one of those stories where we all, as conservatives, we all have an opinion on the fact that he did get a sweetheart deal. And this is just going to be one of those things that conservatives are going to be pissed off about, but this is what ultimately was the end result, the end conclusion.
Well, I've given up making predictions a long time ago, Dan. I think my crystal ball is broken after the past few years. But look, unfortunately, it certainly does look like this plea agreement is moving forward. We'll have to wait and see if the Department of Justice actually asks to delay this plea hearing on July 26th to see if they can produce these documents. We'll see if they ask. We'll see if the judge agrees to that, if they do ask. But certainly, again, this is something that's very troubling. And look, regardless of what happens with the plea itself, this is something that the members of Congress should not let go. They should keep pursuing, again, in order to hold everyone accountable and be sure that everyone has been fully truthful throughout this process.
Zach, let me ask you this, and as we wrap up. So let's say you do finally get the documents that you're looking for, and it is abundantly clear that they, soft pedaled this investigation, and it clearly was, especially based on the evidence, that he did get a sweetheart deal. Let's say that it is abundantly clear the DOJ did try to protect, as I call him, bubble wrap Biden. And so if that is the case, okay, now what? I mean, what comes of that?
Well, there are a few options. Obviously, I think it will have political ramifications. It will provide more insight and information to the House of Representatives or members of the Senate as they conduct their own inquiries. And if the DOJ's conduct is egregious enough, the judge in the case could potentially reject the plea agreement. And so, again, this story is far from over, but there's still a lot of information, still a lot of things that we just don't know at this point in time.
All right, Zac Smith, thank you very much from the Heritage Foundation. We'll have you on again very soon because it's a great interview and great perspective, always from our friends at the Heritage Foundation, 820.